Let's see a small example on how AngularJS helps us to bind the data and view. In a traditional, I mean, I would say jQuery development, we had to depend on DOM IDs and of course DOMs to be manipulated and then attached with the data. So that's a traditional technique we've been doing using jQuery. And then of course it's still one of the easiest way to have the data bind with the, and of course the code logic what we write in the server side, which also had MVC pattern incorporated in most cases, where the server handles all sort of techniques. For example, modeling and view control happens at the server side, and have the full-fledged HTML created in server side itself and being sent to HTTP, which is being loaded. Angular gives us a benefit to define the MVC in the client side itself, so that the server does only a service level platform. For example, just send a web service, and the client level we can produce a view, and we can have a model and a controller defined through JavaScript itself, so that the final view will be produced, and that mechanism can happen in the server side itself. Of course, jQuery also, using jQuery also we can achieve the task, but jQuery is preliminarily considered as a library set of libraries which contains various libraries to simplify, or maybe adding some advanced capability to the existing JavaScript. Angular may be trying to tie in different area where normally a typical website is considered as a most cases it was considered as a server side oriented. Angular trying to make it as client side oriented, so that instead of website we can call them as a web app. So web app, every UI and view binding is happening client side itself. And also Angular contains all necessary libraries, including capability of Ajax, XML, HTTP, REST request, so everything it has built in. We can either use the Angular alongside jQuery, otherwise we can use them independently. Let us see a simple example. I will create a simple I'm using NetBeans. I've already downloaded Angular. I'll keep that inside root integrated. Set. So we need a wrapper, so where our Angular or web app is created. That's in this case, this particular page is going to be an app for me. So I'm just going to give the app name is web app. Time to define it. Create external JavaScript file for. We can follow the convention like app.js, which tells the name of the app as well as loads the necessary modules controllers. Name of your app or any controllers which or controllers or service you are going to load. We'll be putting them inside the square bracket. I'm going to create a controller called a set of controllers, maybe, because I may need to create more controllers as my application grows. So there are controllers, some name. Don't need to follow some conventions or naming convention, but whatever the best you can choose. I often consider loading the group of controllers inside a app and have the controllers separately written. So I can give a name as a controllers. Make sure you start defining your controllers. You can define it using this way. Give a name of the controller which you are going to. This is a wrapper for various controllers. That one controller which I am going to create my controller. Have the scope variable defined this way. This scope variable is going to be a kind of a binder between the controllers and the view. So it will various models could be uh, sent or bind between the view and the controllers. Say like a variable called name. It's going to have a value called some whatever. So whenever this controller loaded, there will be a variable called name will be available under the scope. So I can access them in the view if such controller is loaded. First thing I need to make sure my app is loaded. Load the controller first to see the hierarchy. Controller just need a wrapper tag such as div, so that inside we're going to define the controller my control. Now I can easily print the variable scope using the curly brace groups. In this case, name. Let's run this code. As you see, the value velocity has been printed using model names name, which has been defined inside this controller, and the scope is taking care of binding the data in the specific controller wherever it is loaded. So it's pretty easy. Whenever the variable scope changes, for example, the name changed to something else, so naturally the particular value will also change under the same controller wherever it is defined. It's pretty obvious, like we can get rid of the DOM IDs and we don't need to manually depend on them to bind on the view. Let us see if any other example I can put it. you notice the model has been mapped to the input text field. Whenever the model name changes, notice the particular value is also printed directly over there. It's been the bind happens both the ways. So any change happens in the view, which directly reflect the specific model, and through the controller taking care of the binding because the variable scope defined inside the controller. Or anytime any variable value changes inside the controller itself. So maybe you may have a couple of other functions which will change the controller or scope variable. That will also would reflect in in the view. So that's pretty obvious. Uh, of course, we haven't even used a single DOM ID so far. And also, we'll see one simple example on how to load the web service, because primarily the benefit of having the client-side MVC it's going to be much more helpful if you could synchronize the data which is coming from the server. Just a web service is more than enough, because client-side MVC such as Angular reduces the job of server-side MVC, because the server only thinks, maybe a server only become a service, delivery model, for example, is going to only produce the web service alone. The data or any other view manipulation can happen in the client side itself. Of course, that's the terminology, what we call uh, web app instead of website, because the website usual the control things happen in the server side. So this time it's going to be on the client side. Let me define a service. So of course we're just going to handle a web service call. That's what reason I'm calling the naming convention service. Same methodology. Module. Let me see what's the naming convention I gave. Controllers, so services I'll define, because it may be containing more than one service. Using factory, I can implement my web service callbacks. Of course, the service name, the one of the local service which is going to be implemented, I'm going to say my service, and a function which is going to handle HTTP callback. This time, similar to scope, it's going to be HTTP. A HTTP variable, maybe a slightly improved version of a default XML HTTP response or request, which is a type of a JavaScript. Similarly, I can say it maybe an equivalent to Ajax, $Ajax, AJX in jQuery. With this service, let me create a variable. The result going to have a method called get result from server, whatever name. Function which is going to execute check to return on data time. Define the method. Only the quotation. It's going to be JSON P, so that for the cross-domain callbacks. But make sure you also have a callback wrapped inside. Forgot the curly brace. An object which is going to be injected, and here I have already created one test JSON response in my server. So this is going to be internet. Make sure it has a callback as a JSON callback so that you can capture cross domain. It can be any external websites. So I'm going to put it here. So it will return an object. Object type HTTP. It's going to call this URL, just going to give you this response coming from the server. So now my service has been defined. Make sure the same is loaded in the main app. Because it's going to be confusing. Yes. It's loaded in the app, and of course on the controller I'm also loading the service for my service. Fine. Also import them. So it's incorporated with the controller. Now you can call. I also need to change slightly a bit. This service is going to return This one I'm trying to call. When the service callback goes success, it's going to call a function with the response, and that I'm going to tie with this variable scope name the response. So JSON, the first thing I need to see, it has a result object. So inside the results object I have a array called user because of square box. See, so I have only one array, so I'm going to put 0th in the first index, and I'm going to print something different. So I can print my email address. This particular tag. So as this controller loads, initially the scope name is going to be Vasudev with a name, but after that it will start executing the service and it will return a result. And the result is success. I mean, the HTTP object reference would come here, and when it is success, it will return a callback function with the response parameter, and the response we are reading the next JSON and retrieving those objects. Depends on the JSON mapping whatever you have done, and it can be different across different server or whatever, if it is custom or if it is publicly hosted like Google Map web service APIs. There are plenty of things or public web services available, so it depends on that. In this case I'm trying to print a email. Let me refresh the source code. Something went wrong. Let me see. Services loader. For me, all looks fine. Anything I missed maybe through the imports. Let's see what exactly is going wrong. Oh, gets response from server is of undefined. My service. Take from my old code. It's a method, so that's a stupid mistake. Sorry, so it's a method. change the order again. Be an object to start with. It's going to be an object, a JSON object. So let me see if that fits. Yeah, fix. Now if you notice, my email address printed. Initially it was there for some time. Maybe the time is being taken for web services to complete the execution. Once it is done, it's being directly binded on the view. So you can bind them in a specific controller. You can write a service which will handle the website or web service callbacks and have them attached in the controllers. And of course, you can have a multiple controllers and as if defined the same way. So controller, one more controller can have it and have them defined. And this way, as we progress, so we can keep adding various controllers to make sure it is not terminated, and have them used in our application and, within the app scope. So if you notice the HTML, the whole thing is considered as a dev app because the tag of the HTML wrapper is defined with the app called dev app. The app has two modules loaded. One is dev app controller, another one is dev app services. And this dev app controllers make use of a service called my service. And of course, the service makes a web service callback to a outside URL, so which will bring the results. When the results are available, the controller will take care of binding the data with the variable scope defined as the name, and this model would be immediately displayed whenever the results are available. So we don't need to have a DOM ID to handle the view binding. For example, typically in a older scenario, we'll have our script tag defined and run $AJX and define data URL and everything. When the result is available, same like a success callback, we have to get the result and bind it to a DOM ID and have the HTML populate in that way. Whereas Angular reduces and it gives us a complete framework to handle those things. So primarily I can say jQuery, a kind of set of libraries as we talk, but whereas you need to handle the view binding yourself, because if you are using a dynamic data loading, the partial MVC is done by the server, the remaining is done in the client side. So anyway we are doing view binding in client side as well in the browser using jQuery or any other JavaScript. So why we do two type of MVCs, one from a server side, another one from the client side. Now using Angular, we can completely do the MVC or maybe the client side MVC alone and make the server part only restricted as a service level resource. For example, only gives a web service and data is being binded using Angular. That's one of a great benefit, and of course it helps us to write web apps. We popularly call them usually websites. Now it has the benefit of Angular helps us to write a kind of a complete web app with various view controlling options. Hope this example is going to be useful. So if you have any suggestion, question, you can get in touch with me.